Hey, this is Brett, and you were watching Brett and some books. Got some fun lights for us to enjoy with our stories now, so that is exciting. Figure out a better way to frame them at some point. But this is The Roads Must Roll by Robert A. Heinlein. Who makes the roads roll? The speaker stood on the rostrum and waited for his audience to answer him. The reply came in scattered shouts that cut through the ominous, discontented murmur of the crowd. We do, damn right. Who does the dirty work down inside so that Joe Public can ride at his ease? This time it was a single roar. We do. The speaker pressed his advantage, his words tumbling out in a rasping torrent. He leaned toward the crowd, his eyes picking out individuals at whom to fling his words. What makes sense? The roads. How do they move the food they eat? The roads. How do they get to work? The roads. How do they get home to their wives? The roads. He paused for effect and then lowered his voice. Where would the public be if you boys didn't keep them roads rolling? Behind the eight ball, and everybody knows it. But do they appreciate it? Did we ask for too much? Were our demands unreasonable? The right to resign whenever we want to? Every working stiff and every other job has that. The same pay as the engineers. Why not? Who are the real engineers around here? Do you have to be a cadet in a funny little hat where you can learn to wipe a bearing or a jack down a rotor? Who earns his keep? The gentlemen in the control offices or the boys down inside? What else do we ask? The right to elect our engineers. Why the hell not? Who's competent to pick engineers? The technicians? Or some damn dumb examining board that's never been down inside and couldn't tell a rotor bearing from a field coil? He changed his pace with natural art and lowered his voice still further. I tell you, brother, it's time we quit fiddling around with petitions to the Transport Commission and use a little direct action. Let 'em yammer about democracy. That's a lot of eyewash. We've got the power. We're the men that count. A man had risen in the back of the hall while the speaker was haranguing. He spoke up as the speaker paused. Brother Chairman, he drawled, may I stick in a couple words? You were recognized, Brother Harvey. What I ask is, what's all the shooting for? We've got the highest hourly rate of pay for any mechanical guild, full insurance and retirement, and safe working conditions, barring the chance of going deaf. He paused, his anti-noise helmet further back on his ears, his anti-noise helmet further back from his ears. He was still in dungarees, apparently just up from standing watch. Of course we have to give 90 days notice to quit a job, but cripes, we knew that when we signed up. The roads have got to roll. They can't stop every time some damn lazy punk gets tired of his billet. And now, Soapy, the crack of the gavel cut him short. Pardon me, I mean brother Soapy, tell us how powerful we are, and how we should go in for some direct action. Rats, sure, we could tie up the roads and play hell with the whole community, but so could any screwball with a can of nitroglycerin, and he wouldn't have to be a technician to do it either. We aren't the only frogs in the puddle. Our jobs are important, sure, but where would we be without the farmers or the steel workers or a dozen other trades and professions? He was interrupted by a sallow little man with protruding upper teeth who said, Just wait a minute, Brother Chairman. I'd like to ask Brother Harvey a question. And turned to Harvey and inquired in a sly voice, Are you speaking for the guild, brother, or just for yourself? Maybe you don't believe in the guild. You wouldn't by any chance be... He stopped and slid his eyes up and down Harvey's lank frame. A spotter, would you? Harvey looked over his questioner as if he had found something filthy in a plate of food. Sykes. Wait. Sacks, he told him. If you weren't a runt, I'd run off your teeth down your throat. I helped found this guild. I was on strike in 60. Where were you in 60? With the Finks? The chairman's gavel pounded. There's been enough of this, he said. Nobody knows anything about the history of this guild, doubts the loyalty of Brother Harvey. We'll continue with the regular order of business. He stopped to clear his throat. Ordinarily, we don't open our floor to outsiders, and some of you boys have expressed a distaste for some of the engineers we work under. But there is one engineer we always like to listen to whenever we can get away from his pressing duties. I guess maybe it's because he's had dirt under his nails the same as us. Anyhow, I present at this time Mr. Shorty Van Cleek. A shout from the floor stopped him. Brother Van Cleek! Okay, Brother Van Cleek, Chief Deputy Engineer of this road town. Thanks, Brother Chairman. The guest speaker came briskly forward and grinned expansively at the crowd. He seemed to swell under their approval. Thanks, brothers. I guess our chairman is right. I always feel more comfortable here in the guild hall of the Sacramento sector, or any guild hall for that matter, than I do in the engineers' clubhouse. Those young punk cadet engineers get in my hair. Maybe I should have gone to one of the fancy technical institutes, so I'd have the proper point of view instead of coming up from down inside. Now, about those demands of yours that the Transport Commission just threw back on your face, can I speak freely? Sure you can, Shorty. You can trust us. Well, of course I shouldn't say anything, but I can't help but understand how you feel. The roads are a big show these days, and you are the men who make them roll. It's the natural order of things that your opinions should be listened to and your desires met. One might think that even politicians might be bright enough to see that. Sometimes, lying awake at night, I wonder why we technicians don't take things over and... Your wife is calling, Mr. Gaines. Very well. He flicked off the office intercommunicator and picked up a telephone handset from his desk. Yes, darling. I know I promised, but... You're perfectly right, darling, but Washington has especially requested that we show Mr. Bleckenshop anything he wants to see. I didn't know he was arriving today. No, I can't turn him over to a subordinate. It wouldn't be courteous. He's Minister of Transport for Australia. I told you that. Yes, darling. I know that the courtesy begins at home, but the roads must roll. It's my job. You knew that when you married me, and this is part of my job. That's a good girl. We'll positively have breakfast together. Tomorrow, tell me what? Order horses and a breakfast pack, and we'll make it a picnic. I'll meet you in Bakersfield, usual place. Goodbye, darling. Kiss Junior goodnight for me. He replaced the handset, whereupon the pretty but indignant features of his wife faded from the visor screen. A young woman came into his office. As she opened the door, she exposed momentarily the words painted on its outer side. Diego Reno, Road Town, Office of the Chief Engineer. He gave her a harassed glance. Oh, it's you. Don't marry an engineer, Dolores. Marry an artist. They have more home life. Yes, Mr. Gaines. Mr. Bleckenshop is here, Mr. Gaines. Already? I didn't expect him so soon. The Antipodes ship must have grounded early. Yes, Mr. Gaines. Dolores, don't you ever have emotions? Yes, Mr. Gaines. It seems incredible, but you are never mistaken. Show Mr. Bleckenshop is. Very good, Mr. Gaines. Larry Gaines got up to greet his visitor. Not a particularly impressive little guy, he thought, as he shook hands and exchanged formal amenities. the rolling umbrella and bowler hat were almost too good to be true. An Oxford accent partially masked the underlying clipped, flat nasal twang of the native Australia. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Blenkinsop, and I hope we can make your stay enjoyable.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. This is my first visit to your wonderful country. I feel at home already. The eucalyptus tree, you know, and the brown hills.
But your trip is primarily business?
Yes, yes. My primary purpose is to study your road cities and report to my government on the advisability of trying to adapt your startling American methods to our social programs down under. I thought you understood that was such the reason I was sent to you.
Yes, I did. In a general way, I don't know just what it is that you wish to find out. I suppose that you've heard about our road towns, how they came about, how they operate, and so forth.
I've read great bit, true, but I'm not a technical man, Mr. Gaines, not an engineer. My field is a social and political. I want to see how this remarkable technical change has affected your people. Suppose you tell me about the roads as if I were entirely ignorant, and I'll ask questions.
That seems a practical plan. By the way, how many are there in your party?
Just myself. My secretary went on to Washington.
I see. Gaines glanced at his watch. It's nearly dinner time. Suppose we run up to Stockton sector for dinner. There's a good Chinese restaurant up there that I'm partial to. It will take us about an hour, and you can see the ways in operation while we ride.
Excellent.
Gaines pressed a button on his desk, and a picture formed on a large visitor screen mounted on the opposite wall. It showed a strong-boned, angular young man seated at a semicircular control desk, which was backed by a complex instrument board. A cigarette was tucked in one corner of his mouth. The young man glanced up, waved from the screens.
Greetings and salutations, Chief. What can I do for you?
Hi, Dave. You've got the evening watch, huh? I'm running up to the Stockton sector for dinner. Where's Von Cleek?
Going to a meeting somewhere, he didn't say.
Anything to report?
No, sir. The roads are rolling. All the little people are going righty home to their dinners.
Okay, keep 'em rolling.
They'll roll, Chief.
Gaines snapped off the connection and turned to Blenkinsop. Van Cleek is my chief deputy. I wish he'd spent more time on the road and less on politics. Davidson can handle things, however. Shall we go on? They glided down an electric staircase and debouched on the sidewalk, which bordered the northbound 5-mile-an-hour strip. After skirting a stairway trunk-marked overpass to southbound road, they paused at the edge of the first strip. Have you ever ridden a conveyor strip before? Gaines inquired. It's quite simple. Just remember to face the motion of the strip as you get on. They threaded their way through homebound throngs, passing from strip to strip. Down the center of the 20-mile-an-hour strip ran a glassite partition which reached nearly to the spreading roof. The Honorable Mr. Blenkinsop raised his eyes inquiringly as he looked on. Oh, that, Gaines answered the unspoken question as he slid back a panel door and ushered his guests through. That's a windbreak. If we don't have some way of separating the air currents over the strips of different speeds, the wind would tear our clothes off in the 100-mile-an-hour strip. He bent his head down to Blenkinsop's as he spoke, in order to cut through the rush of air against the road surfaces, the noise of the crowd, and the muted roar of the driving mechanism concealed beneath the moving strips. The combination of noises inhibited further conversation as they proceeded toward the middle of the roadway. After passing through some wind screens,
located at 40, 60, and 80 miles an hour strips, respectively. They finally reached the maximum speed strip, the 100-mile-an-hour strip, which made the round trip. San Diego to Reno and back in 12 hours. Blenkinsop found himself on a roadway 20 feet wide, facing another partition. Immediately opposite him, in an illuminated side show window, proclaimed, "Jake's Steakhouse number 4, the fastest meal on the fastest road. To dine on the fly makes the road fly by." "Amazing," said Mr. Blenkinsop. "I would like to be dining in a tram. This is really a proper restaurant." "Yeah, one of the best. Not fancy, but sound." I say, could we?" Gaines smiled at him. "You'd like to try it, wouldn't you, sir?" "I don't wish to interfere with your plans." "Quite all right. I'm hungry myself, and Stockton is a long hour away. Let's go in." Gaines greeted the manageress as an old friend. "Hello, Mrs. McCoy. How are you tonight?" "If it isn't the chief himself. It's been a long time since we've had the pleasure of seeing your face." She led them to a booth somewhat detached from the crowd of dining commuters. "And will you and your friend be having dinner?" "Yes, Mrs. McCoy. Suppose you order for us, but be sure it includes one of your steaks. 2 inches thick from a steer that died happy." She glided away, moving her fat frame with surprising grace. With sophisticated foreknowledge of the chief engineer's needs, Mrs. McCoy had left a portable phone at the table. Gaines plugged it into the accommodation jack at the side of the booth and dialed the number. "Hello, Davidson? Dave, this is the chief. I'm in Jake's Steakhouse, number 4 for supper. You can reach me by calling 10L66. He replaced the handset, and Blenkinsop inquired politely, "Is it necessary for you to be available at all times?" Not strictly necessary," Gaines told him, "but I feel safer when I'm in touch. Either Van Cleek or myself should be somewhere in the senior engineer of the watch. That's Davidson's shift. Can get hold of us in a pinch. If it's a real emergency, I want to be there naturally." "What would constitute a real emergency?" "2 things, principally. A power failure on the rotors would bring the road to a standstill and possibly strand millions of people 100 miles or more from their homes. If it happened during a rush hour, we would have to evacuate those millions from the road. Not too easy to do." "You say millions? As many as that?" "Yes, indeed. There are 12 million people dependent on this roadway, living and working in the buildings adjacent to it, or within 5 miles of each side. The age of power blends into the age of transportation almost imperceptibly, but 2 events stand out as the landmarks in the change: the invention of the sun power screen, the opening of the first moving road. The power resources of oil and coal in the United States had, save for the few sporadic outbreaks of common sense, been shamefully wasted in their development through all the first half of the 20th century. Simultaneously, the automobile, from its humble start as a one-lunged horseless carriage, grew into a steel-bodied monster of over 100 horsepower and capable of making more than 100 miles an hour. They boiled over the countryside like yeast and ferment. In the middle of the century, it was estimated that there was a motor vehicle for every 2 persons in the United States. They continued the seeds of their own destruction. 70 million steel juggernauts, operated by imperfect human beings at high speeds, are more destructive than war. In the same reference year, the premiums paid for compulsory liability and property damage insurance by automobile owners exceeded in amount the sum paid the same year to purchase automobiles. Safe driving campaigns were chronic phenomena,
but were mere pious attempts to put Humpty Dumpty together again. It was not physically possible to drive safely in those crowded metropolises. Pedestrians were sardonically divided into two classes, the quick and the dead. But a pedestrian could be defined as a man who had found a place to park his car. The automobile made possible huge cities, then choked those same cities to death with their numbers. In 1900, Herbert George Wells pointed out that the saturation point in the size of a city might be mathematically predicted in terms of its transportation facilities. From a standpoint of speed alone, the automobile made possible cities 200 miles in diameter, but the traffic congestion and inescapable inherent danger of high-powered, individually operated vehicles canceled out the possibility. Federal Highway number 66 from Los Angeles to Chicago, the main street of America, was transformed into a superhighway for motor vehicles with an underspeed limit of 60 miles per hour. It was planned as a public works project to stimulate heavy industry. It had an unexpected byproduct. The great cities of Chicago and St. Louis stretched out urban pseudopods toward each other until they met near Bloomington, Illinois. The two parent cities actually shrank in population. The city of San Francisco replaced its antiquated cable cars with moving stairways, powered with the Douglas Martin solar reception screens. The largest number of automobile licenses in history had been issued that calendar year, but the end of the automobile was in sight. The National Defense Act closed its era. This act, one of the most bitterly debated ever to be brought out of committee, declared petroleum to be an essential and limited material of war. The Army and Navy had first call on all oil above or below the ground. 70 million civilian vehicles face short and expensive rations. Take the superhighways of the period. Urban throughout their length, and the mechanized streets of San Francisco's hills, heat to boiling point, with imminent shortage of gasoline, flavor with Yankee ingenuity, the first mechanized road was opened between Cincinnati and Cleveland. It was, as one would expect, comparatively primitive in design. The fastest strip moved only 30 miles per hour and was quite narrow, for no one had thought of the possibility of locating retail trade on the strips themselves. Nevertheless, it was a prototype of the social pattern which was to dominate the American scene within the next 2 decades, neither rural nor urban, but partaking equally of both, and based on rapid, safe, cheap, convenient transportation. Factories, wide, low buildings whose roofs were covered with solar power panels of the same type that drove the roads, lined the roadway on each side. Back of them and interspersed among them were the commercial hotels, retail stores, theaters, apartment houses. Beyond this long, thick, narrow strip was the open countryside where much of the population lived. Their homes dotted the hills, hung on the banks of creeks, and nestled in between farms. They worked in the city, but lived in the country, and these two were not 10 minutes apart. Mrs. McCoy served the chief and his guest in person. They checked their conversation at the sight of the magnificent steaks. Up and down the 600-mile line, sector engineers of the watch were getting on in their early hourly reports of their subsector technicians. Subsector 1, check. Subsector 2, check. Tensionometer readings, voltage, load, bearing temperatures,
synchro tachometer readings. Subsector 7, check. Hard-bitten, abled men and dungarees who lived much of their lives down inside amongst the unmuted roar of the 100-mile strip, the shrill whine of driving motors, and the complaint of the relay rollers. Davidson studied the moving model of the road, spreading out before him in the main control room at Fresno sector. He watched the barely perceptible scrawl of the miniature 100-mile strip and subconsciously noted the reference number on it, which located Jake's Steakhouse number 4. The chief would be getting into Stockton soon. He'd give him a ring after the hourly reports were in. Everything was quiet. Traffic tonnage was normal for rush hour. He would be sleepy before this watch was over. He turned to his cadet engineer of the watch. Mr. Barnes? Yes, sir. I think we could use some coffee. Good idea, sir. I'll order some as soon as the hourlies are in. The minute hand of the control board chronometer reached 12. The cadet watch officer threw a switch. All sectors report, he said in crisp, self-conscious tones. The faces of 2 men flicked into view on the visor screen. The younger answered him with the same air of acting under supervision. Diego Circle, rolling. They were at once replaced by 2 more. Angeles sector, rolling. Then Bakersfield sector, rolling. And Stockton sector, rolling. Finally, when Reno Circle had reported, the cadet turned to Davidson and reported, Rolling, sir. Very well, keep them rolling. The visor screen flashed on once more. Sacramento sector, supplementary report. Proceed. Cadet Engineer Gunther, while on visual inspection as a cadet sector engineer of the watch, found Cadet Engineer Alex Jeans on watch as Cadet Subsector Technician and R.J. Ross, Technician Second Class, on watch as technician for the same subsector, engaged in playing cards. It was not possible to tell with any accuracy how long they had been neglected to patrol their subsector. Any damage? One rotor running hot, but still synchronized. It was jacked down and replaced. Very well. Have the paymaster give Ross his time and turn him over to civil authorities. Place Cadet Jeans under arrest and order him to report to me. Very well, sir. Keep him rolling. Davidson turned back to control desk and dialed Chief Engineer Gaines' temporary number. You mentioned that there were 2 things that could cause major trouble on the road, Mr. Gaines, but you mentioned that there were 2 things that could cause major trouble on the road, Mr. Gaines, but you only spoke of power failure for the rotors. Gaines pursued an elusive bit of salad before answering. There really isn't a second major trouble. It won't happen again. However, we are traveling along here at 100 miles per hour. Can you visualize what would happen if this strip under us should break? Mr. Blenkinsop shifted nervously in his chair. Rather a disconcerting idea, don't you think? I say, one is hardly aware traveling at high speed here in this snug room. What would the result be? Don't let it bother you. The strip can't park. It's built up of overlapping sections in such a fashion that it has a safety factor of better than 12 to 1. Several miles of rotors would have to be shut down all at once, and the circuit breakers for the rest of the line to fail and to trip out before there could possibly be sufficient tension on the strip to cause it to part. But once it happened on the Philadelphia-Jersey Road, and we aren't likely to forget it. It was one of the earliest high-speed roads, carrying tremendous passenger traffic, as well as heavy freight, since it serviced a heavy industrialized area. The ship was hardly more than a conveyor belt, or the strip was hardly more than a conveyor belt, and no one had foreseen the weight it would carry. It was crowded. Part of the strip behind the brake buckled for miles, crushing the passengers against the roof at 80 miles per hour. The section forward of the brake cracked like a whip, spilling passengers onto the slower ways, dropping them onto exposed rollers and rotors down inside, and snapping them up against the roof. Over 3,000 people were killed in that one accident, and there was much agitation to abolish the roads. They were even shut down for a week by presidential order. But he was forced to reopen them again. There was no alternative. Really? Why not? The country had become economically dependent on the roads. They were the principal means of transportation in the industrial areas, the only means of economic importance. Factories were shut down, food didn't move, people got hungry, and the president was forced to let them roll again. It was the only thing that could be done. The social pattern had crystallized in one form, and it couldn't be changed overnight. A large industrialized population must have large-scale transportation, not only for people, but for trade. Mr. Blenkinsop fussed with his napkin, and rather diffidently suggested, "Mr. Gaines, I do not intend to disparage the ingenious accomplishments of your great people, but isn't it possible that you may have put too many eggs in one basket in allowing your whole economy to become dependent on the functioning of one type of machinery?" Gaines considered this soberly. "I see your point. Yes and no. Every civilization above the peasant and the village type is dependent on some key type of machinery. The Old South was based on the cotton gin. Imperial England was made possible by the steam engine. Large populations have to have machines for power, for transportation, and for manufacturing in order to live. Had it not been for machinery, the large populations could have never grown up. That's not a fault of the machine, that's its virtue. But it is true that whenever we develop machinery to the point where it will support large populations at a high standard of living, we are then bound to keep that machinery running, or suffer the consequences. But the real hazard in that is not the machinery, but the men who run the machinery. These roads, as machines, are all right. They are strong and safe, and will do everything they were designed to do. No, it's not the machines, it's the men. When population is dependent on a machine, they are hostages of the men who tend the machines. If their morale is high, their sense of duty strong. Someone up near the front of the restaurant had turned up the volume control on the radio, letting out a blast of music that drowned out Gaines' words. But when the sound had been tapered down to a more nearly bearable volume, he was saying, "Listen to that. It illustrates my point." Blenkinsop turned an ear to the music. It was a swinging march of compelling rhythm on a modern interpretive arrangement. One could hear the roar of machinery, the repetitive clutter of mechanisms. A pleased smile of recognition spread over the Australian's face. "It's your field artillery song. The roll of the caissons, isn't it? But I don't see the connection." "You're right. It was the roll of the caissons, but we adapted it for our own purposes. It is the road song of the transport cadets." Wait. The persistent throb of the march continued and seemed to blend with the vibration of the roadway underneath into a single timpano. Then a male chorus took up the verse. "Hear them hum, watch them run, no, our job is never done.
Our roadways keep rolling along. While you ride, while you glide, we're watching down inside, so your roadways keep rolling along. Oh, it's high, 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 the rotormen are we. Check off the sectors loud and strong. 1, 2, 3, anywhere you go, you are bound to know that the railways are rolling along. Keep them rolling, that your railways are rolling along. See, said Gaines with more animation in his voice. See, that is the real purpose of the United States Academy of Transport. That is the reason why the transport engineers are a semi-military profession. With strict discipline, we are the bottleneck, the sine qua non of all industry, all economic life. Other industries can go on strike and only create a temporary and partial dislocations. Crops can fail here and there, and the country takes up the slack. But the roads stop rolling, everything else must stop. The effects would be the same as a general strike, with this important difference. It takes a majority of the population, fired by a real feeling of grievance, to create a general strike, but the men that run the roads, few as they are, can create the same complete paralysis. We just had one strike on the roads back in '60. It was justified, I think, and it corrected a lot of real abuses, but it mustn't happen again. But what's to happen? What's to prevent it happening again, Mr. Gaines? Morale, esprit de corps. The technicians in the road service are indoctrinated constantly with the idea that their job is a sacred trust. Besides, we do everything we can to build up their social position. But even more important is the academy. We try to turn out graduate engineers imbued with the same loyalty, the same iron self-discipline, and determination to perform their duty to the community at any cost that Annapolis and West Point and Goddard are so successful in inculcating in their graduates. Goddard? Oh yes, their rocket field. Have you ever been successful, do you think? Not entirely, perhaps, but we will be. It takes time to build up a tradition. When the oldest engineer is a man who entered the academy in his teens, we can afford to relax a little and treat it as a solved problem. I suppose you all graduate. Gaines grinned. You flatter me. I might look younger than I am. No, I'm a carryover from the Army. You see, the War Department operated the roads for some 3 months during the reorganization after the strike in '60. I served on the conciliation board that awarded pay increases and adjusted working conditions. Then I was assigned. The signal light of the portable phone glowed red. Gaines said, "Excuse me," and picked up the handset. Yes? Blenkinsop could overhear the voice at the other end. This is Davidson, Chief. The roads are rolling. Very well. Keep them rolling. Had another trouble report from that Sacramento sector. Again? What this time? And before Davidson could reply, he was cut off. As Gaines reached out to dial him back, his coffee cup, half full, landed in his lap. Blenkinsop was aware, even as he was lurched against the edge of the table, of a disquieting change in the hum of the roadway. What has happened, Mr. Gaines? Don't know. Emergency stop. God knows why. He was dialing furiously. Shortly, he flung the phone down, without bothering to return the handset to its cradle. Phones are out. Come on. No, you'll be safe here. Wait. Must I? Well, come along then and stick close to me. He turned away, having dismissed the Australian cabinet minister from his mind. The strip ground slowly to a rest, the giant rotors and myriad rollers reacting as flywheels and preventing a disastrous sudden stop. Already a little knot of commuters, disturbed at their evening meal, were attempting to crowd out the door of the restaurant. Halt! There is something about a command issued by one used to being obeyed which enforces compliance. It may be intonation, or perhaps a more esoteric power, such as animal tamers are reputed to be able to exercise in controlling ferocious beasts. But it does not exist, and cannot be used to compel even those not habituated to obedience. The commuters stopped in their tracks. Gaines continued, "Remain in the restaurant until we are ready to evacuate you. I am the chief engineer. You will be in no danger here. You," he pointed to a big fellow near the door, "you're deputized. Don't let anyone leave here without proper authority. Mrs. McCoy, resume serving dinner." Gaines strode out the door, Blenkinsop tagging along. The situation outside permitted no such simple measures. The 100-mile strip alone had stopped. 20 feet away, the next strip flew by at an unchecked 95 miles per hour. The passengers on it flickered past, unreal cardboard figures. The 20-foot walkway at the maximum speed strip had been crowded when the breakdown occurred. Now the customers of shops, of lunch stands, and of other places of business, the occupants of lounges, of television theaters, all came crowding out onto the walkway to see what had happened. The first disaster struck almost immediately. The crowd surged and pushed along against the middle-aged woman on its outer edge. In attempting to recover balance, she shot one foot over the edge of the flashing 95-mile strip. She recognized her gruesome error, for she screamed before she let her foot touch the ribbon. She spun around and landed heavily on the moving strip and was rolled by it, as the strip attempted to impart her to mass at one below a velocity of 95 miles per hour, 139 feet per second. As she rolled, she mowed down some of the other cardboard figures as a sickle strikes a strand of grass. Quickly, she was out of sight, her identity, her injuries, and her fate undetermined and already remote. But the consequences of her mishap were not done with. One of the flickering cardboard figures bowled over by her relative moment fell toward the 100-mile strip, slammed into the shock-bound crowd, and suddenly appeared as a live man, but broken and bleeding, amidst the luckless, fallen victims whose bodies had checked his wild flight. Even there it did not end. The disaster spread from its source, each hapless human ninepin more likely than not to knock down others, so that they fell over the danger-laden boundary and in turn ricocheted to a dearly bought equilibrium. But the focus of calamity sped out of sight as Blenkinsop could see no more. His active mind, accustomed to dealing with large numbers of individual human beings, multiplied the tragic sequence what he had witnessed by 1,200 miles of thronged conveyor strip, and his stomach chilled. To Blenkinsop's surprise, Gaines made no effort to succor the fallen, nor to quell the fear-infected mob, but to turn an expressionless face back to the restaurant. "Flower, go somewhere." When Blenkinsop saw that he was actually... re-entering the restaurant, he plucked at Gaines's sleeve. "Aren't we going to help those poor people?" The cold planes of the face of the man who had answered him bore no resemblance to his genial, rather boyish host of a few minutes before. "No, bystanders can help them. I've got the whole road to think of. Don't bother me." Crushed and somewhat indignant, the politician did as he was ordered. Rationally, he knew that the chief engineer was right. A man responsible for the safety of millions cannot turn aside from his duty to render personal service to one. But the cold detachment of such viewpoint was repugnant to him. Gaines was back in the restaurant. "Mrs. McCoy, where is your getaway?" "In the pantry, sir." Gaines hurried there, Blenkinsop at his heels. A nervous Filipino salad boy shrank out of Gaines' way as he casually swept a supply of prepared green stuffs onto the floor and stepped up onto the counter where they had rested. Directly above his head and within reach was a circular manhole, counterweighted and operated by a hand wheel set in its center. A short steel ladder, hinged to the edge of the opening, was swung up flat to the ceiling and secured by a hook. Blenkinsop lost his hat in this endeavor to clamber quickly enough up the ladder after Gaines. When he emerged on the roof of the building, Gaines was searching the ceiling of the roadway with a pocket flashlight. He was shuffling along, stooped double in the awkward 4 feet space between the roof underfoot and the ceiling. He had found what he sought, some 50 feet away, another manhole cover, similar to the one they had used